Okay, good evening. I'm John Trallo. Most of you know me from Sullivan County. I'm a member of Shale Justice Coalition. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. And a special thank you to John Hangar, former DEP Secretary. Shale Justice is a coalition of true grassroots organizations. Shale Justice began in January of this year, and in that short time we have had incredible growth. We currently have member groups in Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, the United Kingdom, and are adding new member groups every week from around the world. We share a common goal of securing a healthy future in the face of extreme energy extraction, industrialization of our communities. I do want to clarify some misinformation that you may or may have not heard about tonight's event. The Marcellus Drilling News, an online pro-gas blog, had inaccurately reported that Shale Justice was going to gate crash this event and stage a protest. This is ridiculous, as Shale Justice invited Secretary Hangar to speak and made the arrangements. So how can we really gate crash our own event that we organized? Right. The Marcellus Drilling News story is another example of how the industry likes to portray groups and individuals who care about our countries, our states, our communities, and our families as radicals. Following remarks by Secretary Hangar, we will have a Q&A. We would like everyone to have an opportunity to express their thoughts, concerns, ask questions. We have agreed that although we may disagree with John Hangar's position on certain things, we are committed to keeping this a civil and respectful exchange. This is going to be a listening and Q&A session, not a protest. John Hangar is former Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, a position he held between September 2008 and January 2011 under former Governor Edward Rendell. He is also a former Commissioner of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. Secretary Hangar is currently Special Counsel for Eckhart Siemens, an American law firm and lobbying organization headquartered in Pittsburgh. Secretary Hangar's experience consists of environmental issues, energy, gas drilling, and a green economy issue. He is one of two Pennsylvanians who have served as both Secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection and as the Commissioner of Pennsylvania Public Utility. He is currently Democrat candidate for Governor of Pennsylvania in 2014. Please welcome John Hangar.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and have a dialogue with you. And you're kind to allow a little bit of a monologue at the beginning, but always the dialogue is best. So I look forward to an exchange of views, and I always learn, and I'm sure that I'll learn some things tonight. So let me just tell you not anything really about my background, other than to say I came to Pennsylvania in 1981, went to law school at the University of Pennsylvania School of Law, and came out of law school and went to work for Community Legal Services in the city of Philadelphia, and represented low-income families who had no ability to pay for a lawyer and had legal problems. I very frankly thought that I was going to be involved with folks who needed assistance perhaps on landlord-tenant issues or Social Security, that kind of problem. And the first day of work, I show up. This was my dream job, and the executive director said, "John, you're in the energy project." And I had no idea what the energy project was. It turned out the energy project was a group of 4 people within this organization. There were about 200 people working in community legal service, about 60 attorneys, and then paralegals and legal secretaries in addition. And this was a small group within community legal services that worked just on helping people who had an inability to pay their utility bills, basically. And also had major problems with how utilities were regulated within the city of Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania. That's where I started. I should say, before I went to law school, I worked on food security issues in a small nonprofit, working with people who literally didn't have enough to eat right here in the United States. Not overseas, but right here in the United States. So that was my background. And when I started working on energy, it was working for people who literally went through a winter without a gas service connected because they couldn't afford the bill. And it was literally working with people who brought in candles because their electric service had been shut off, and the like. I saw some things I never want to see again, though unfortunately they're still with us around Pennsylvania. I'll tell you only one story about my representations during that period of time. And it involved a school crossing guard in the city of Philadelphia who had 3 daughters. She worked full-time during the school year, and she was living in a property that had no water service, no sewer service, no electric service, no gas service. They all had been shut off because of an inability to pay. One night, one of her 3 daughters got up and knocked over a candle that was in the property. Because when folks don't have a utility service, they resort to dangerous alternatives. They don't actually sit there in the dark and the cold. They bring in things like space heaters or kerosene heaters, or they light candles. The house erupted in flames because the candle ignited the property. She got out, Mrs. Peacock got out of the property and found one of her 3 daughters on the street with her. She went back in to try to rescue the 2 others and never came out, nor did the other 2. The Philadelphia Fire Department responded very quickly and bravely, as every fireman who responds to a call like that is putting their life on the line too. Nothing could be done for 3 people who lost their lives, in my mind, just because they were too poor to pay the utility bill. When I was in the city, I got noticed because I was made the public advocate for all the ratepayers of Philadelphia. I got noticed by Governor Casey, and he asked that I be a public utility commissioner. And the rest is sort of what you see from there. I've spent 29 years working on energy, completely unplanned, but that's what I've spent my life doing. And as I say to people, my experience with energy is both a blessing and a curse. And what do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to energy, I'm no longer ignorant, and therefore I'm not blissful. Remember that old saying, ignorance is bliss? I know a whole lot about energy, and the more you learn, I'm afraid, the less blissful you get when it comes to energy. And what I've learned over the 29-year period is that all of our traditional energy choices, the traditional basket, I include 4: coal, oil, gas, and nuclear, have major strengths and weaknesses. When it comes to environment and health, they have major risks and major impacts, all of them. It's one of the reasons I call those choices all ugly. And it's one of the reasons that I've been, for more than 15 years, a strong proponent of renewable energy. I was for renewable energy before it was cool. I was working hard for wind and solar well before we had any wind and solar in Pennsylvania. Very frankly, I've led fights for every wind farm in Pennsylvania and taken on some local organizations, typically, who don't want wind farms in Pennsylvania. And I have been criticized by those folks, and they have some good points to make. They say, look, those wind turbines are ugly. This is a beautiful community. They're industrial. They're huge machines. They change the character of the community. It's true. They are huge machines. They say they require land clearing and tree knocking down. That's also true. It's true. And then those who love birds point out that they do kill a number of birds. In my mind, it's a small number of birds, but in the minds of those who love birds, it's a big number. It's roughly 4 per turbine per year. They also kill more bats than that. The bat mortality issues associated with wind turbines are actually, I think, more significant than the bird mortality issues associated with wind turbines. And I look at those folks and I say, look, given your values, I understand why you're opposed to wind. Now, I'm for wind, and I'll fight you because I understand what happens if we don't use wind energy. We're going to use more of the traditional 4, coal, oil, gas, and nuclear. It's inescapable math that if you're not getting energy from some place, you're going to be getting it from some other place. Unfortunately, if we're not using renewable energy, it's absolutely the case that the alternatives are going to have more impact. So I have fought hard for years and years for renewable energy because I don't like the ugly choices that we have when it comes to their environmental and economic, their environmental and public safety impacts. I'm also unapologetically concerned about the cost of energy. And maybe some in this room are unconcerned about the cost of energy. But because of my background, and because of my experience with poor people and often working people, it matters to me how much energy costs. Because I've seen the consequences of energy poverty. And they're very, very ugly. Very, very ugly. So the more you learn about energy, I think the less blissful you get, because you quickly find out that all of these choices have downsides. And there are good people who are campaigning tonight to shut down the nuclear industry. Okay? I live in the 3 Mile Island nuclear evacuation area. I certainly am living that risk. We had a meltdown. It's a very real risk. We are piling up at 3 Mile Island and every nuclear station in Pennsylvania the most toxic waste stream known to human beings, radioactive waste. It was supposed to be centrally stored in Yucca Mountain. People in Nevada said no thank you. Can't really blame them. At least I can't blame them for saying no thank you to being the permanent repository. And as a result, we're doing something that was never ever intended, and that is pile it up, store it, I think indefinitely, which is another way perhaps of saying forever, in our local communities. And that's not a good practice whatsoever, but it's what we're doing. So the good people are trying to shut down nuclear power plants today. Now, I'm not actually pro or anti-nuclear. I'm not pro or anti any of the traditional 4 in that sense. I'm pro renewable energy, getting to better choices. But I certainly know what would happen if for every nuclear power plant that shuts down. Now, the truth of the matter is that we're going to burn here in the United States more coal and probably natural gas, because that's an electric source. We burn very little oil to make electricity anymore. But we're going to burn more coal and oil, coal and gas every time a nuclear plant shuts down. So while folks who fear, with some reason, nuclear power plants may be thrilled when a nuclear power plant shuts down, I'm actually not real excited when that happens, because I know too much, and I can't find the bliss in such news. The same is true for coal. I served as the chair of the Pennsylvania Coal Mine Safety Board, and there's a lot of impacts on the environment from the mining and combustion of coal. It's an endless list. I've been in people's homes well before the word fracking was even spoken by anybody, whose homes have been undermined. Their water is being destroyed here in Pennsylvania, and the foundations of their homes have been cracked. Hundreds, even thousands of people have gone through that in Pennsylvania. And I know the statistics about women who have babies, and 1 out of 6 women who have babies have mercury levels in their blood that are toxic. How did that happen? happen because folks like to eat fish, and fish come into contact with mercury. Where does it come from? Coal burning. 1 out of 6 people, 1 out of 6 women in the United States have toxic levels of mercury in their blood, and it's from coal burning. That's not from nuclear. That's not from burning oil. It's not from burning gas. It's burning coal, and then eating the fish. I know that there are 34,000 people a year in the U.S. who die from breathing soot. That comes almost exclusively from burning coal and burning some diesel. 34,000 people a year. That's a very well documented and accepted number. That's astonishing. Astonishing number. And I've been around Pennsylvania and people's properties where there's coal dust all over their homes. Been to churches with coal dust all over their homes. And I see all of that. And that's something that concerns me. I've spent a good part of my career trying to fix impacts from oil, including the streams that have been devastated by acidic water. 5,000 miles of streams. 5,000 miles of streams. Just in Pennsylvania. Just in Pennsylvania. There is no more significant water impact in Pennsylvania than the acidic leaching from coal mines. None. More bigger than that. That's not to say that piling up nuclear waste is a good thing. It's not at people's homes or at nuclear plants. It's not to say that killing a bird with a wind turbine is a good thing. It's not. I drove here on gasoline. I don't know what you all drove here, but probably most of you that drove here on gasoline. Some of you might be on electricity. My sister does have a Volt and tries to be on electric most of the time. So can't quite say everybody's driving on oil, but oil is horrendous in terms of its impact on the environment. It's so ubiquitous, and its impacts are so consistent, big and small, that it is absolutely devastating. Whether it was the Gulf BP oil spill, that's the huge one that catches the headlines, and you once in a while hear about these little ones that catch the headlines, like down in Arkansas, that one, or the rupture in Michigan, where they're still trying to clean it up. But what doesn't catch any of the headlines is these small leaks from tanks all over Pennsylvania, all over America. These small leaks in the backyard when somebody's sloppy with an oil change. The little breaks that aren't become big news. The tankers that go off the road and spill out. It's just a horrendous impact that it has on the environment. And I'm one of those people who thinks that we have fought wars for oil. Not everybody agrees with that statement, but I believe we have fought at least 2 wars for oil. So some folks hate corn ethanol, and I understand the criticisms. There's huge runoff from the corn crop, phosphorus and nitrogen runoff. The major dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico that are attributable to agricultural runoff, basically nitrogen and phosphorus and water, too much of it. And 40% of the corn crop in the U.S. now is used to make corn ethanol. It's hard to say that has no impact on the environment. It has a significant impact on the environment and may also have an impact on food prices. And again, those who can't afford it pay, obviously, that's an enormous impact. One can keep on going like this. And what this has led me to conclude is that all of these industries, every single one of the traditional 4, have to be strongly regulated. They have to be reasonably taxed. They should be properly zoned because, including wind farms, they are industrial activity. In Pennsylvania, we're doing none of that. We're not strongly regulating it. We're not taxing it, and we're not. Depending on what the Supreme Court rules, there may not be effective zoning allowed for at least natural gas. So those things are bring me back to trying to work hard for renewables, and and energy efficiency. That's when I do start smiling. Up until then, I don't start smiling. I'm one of these people who see a wind turbine and I start smiling. I'm not one of these people who see a wind turbine and say it's ugly and it's killing birds. I understand that criticism, but I start smiling. When I see a solar panel, I really start smiling. And when I see people being careful with energy, driving an energy efficient car, being careful about building construction, things like that, I start smiling. But I'm not able to look at you and tell you that any of these four energy resources, the traditional energy resources, are somehow or another worse than all the rest. I have my own views about the prioritization of impacts. But in my own view, they all present problems, and they all must be strongly regulated. And in some cases, they need to be kept away from things and kept out of certain places. That's something I certainly believe in. So, I am running for governor. I'm running for governor on a platform that I think inarguably makes me the greenest candidate ever to run for governor. It includes more than doubling renewable energy. We can quadruple wind farms. We can more than double energy efficiency. And all of these things that I'm talking about, I'm the guy who made it happen. That's the difference with me and the other candidates. You might not like where I come down ultimately on one or two things, but you're looking at somebody who's had real success in building wind farms and solar and getting energy efficiency legislation passed. And frankly, nobody in this room or nobody in Pennsylvania has done more than me. Maybe somebody's done as much, but I haven't truthfully met them because I've been at it for a very, very long time. So I've got a very aggressive platform on renewables and on energy efficiency. I wrote with a team Pennsylvania's Climate Action Plan. Got the bill passed requiring DEP to write it, and then had the privilege of being the secretary at the time DEP was writing it. It would cut CO2 emissions in Pennsylvania by a third, and also create about 60,000 jobs, because I think most of us in this room would agree you can create jobs as you move towards energy efficiency and renewable energy. That's a way of not only reducing pollution and risk, but also creating employment. And Pennsylvania tonight is 49th out of 50 states in job creation in the last 12 months. This is an administration that's horrendous on gas regulation, horrendous on renewable energy, and horrendous on education. We're in a state university that's been savaged by cuts, and very frankly horrendous on basic job creation. Just a terrible record across the board. Goodness knows why any Pennsylvanian would vote for that. So I've got detailed plans on all of those areas: education, job creation, renewable energy, climate action plan. I'll implement it. I wrote it. And I will do Growing Greener 3. We've had Growing Greener 1 and 2 with Ridge and Rendell. This governor is not interested in being part of that, I think, good bipartisan tradition in Pennsylvania. I would continue that tradition, and I've proposed a $745 million Growing Greener 3 7-year program, $100 million a year to invest in trying to improve our environment. I have proposed a detailed drilling plan. I'm the only candidate who's proposed a detailed drilling plan. It's up on my website. It includes a number of things that I think are critical, including banning outdoor pits, banning the disposal of untreated drilling wastewater in streams, which, by the way, had been going on in Pennsylvania for about close to 100 years before I got there in 2008. And also includes requiring compressor engines and other equipment that is used in the industry to install the best pollution control equipment, or run on electricity, not on diesel, or even gas. Running on gas is much cleaner than running on diesel. So there's 19, 20 points to it. It includes not drilling in the loyal sock forest. It includes extending the moratorium on state forests. By the way, I, with John Quigley, wrote the moratorium on state forests. You know, and I believe in it strongly. I don't want to see an extension of drilling in the state forest. And it includes, and it's the only plan I've seen, or only point I've seen, it includes a practical way of actually trying to keep drilling out of state parks. It's a very real threat that it could be drilling in state parks. As you probably know, the mineral resources under some state parks are not owned by the Commonwealth, they're privately owned. And given the constitutional protection of private property in the United States, which I don't think, at least I'm not going to criticize, I believe that's important, that presents very major issues. When somebody has a private property interest in a mineral resource under a state park, given that constitutional protection of their private property interest, there's real issues there. And I think I have a way of, frankly, protecting the state park while respecting the Constitution. And I encourage you to take a look at that. So there's a lot there that I've done with my career. There's a lot there that I've proposed specifically. And I'll end by simply saying I have been also a loud proponent for a drilling tax for a long time. And continue to be very specific about what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the West Virginia drilling tax, which could raise as much as $800 million, depending on where gas prices are. That record and my plans are such that there are some in the gas industry walking around Harrisburg saying anybody but me, because very frankly I know the business, I know the energy world better than just about anybody, because I've spent 29 years understanding the energy world, and that's the reason why I'm not blissful tonight. And I know when the gas industry's got a real point. Once in a while they do. And I know when they're pulling the wool over their eyes. Now the problem with Governor Corbett is you don't have to pull the wool over his eyes. He has just turned this state over to the gas industry and has not made sure that it's properly regulated, reasonably zoned, and taxed. And he's not doing the things to minimize risk and maximize benefits. Notice how I put that. Minimize risk and maximize benefits. There's no such thing as zero impact energy. There's no such thing really as zero risk energy. I get asked all the time, well, is quote unquote fracking safe? And because I'm direct and blunt with people, I say, well, if you mean there's zero risk, no. And then I say, by the way, nor is the nuclear plant that I'm right by meet that definition. Now, what everybody ought to be focusing on, whether it's coal, oil, gas, and nuclear, in my view, is minimizing risk and maximizing benefit, and most importantly, getting us to better choices. Because the traditional four are just plain ugly when it comes to their impact on the environment and the risks they pose. You could ask the people of Fukushima, did they like nuclear power? The day before the accident, I think they would have all said yeah. The day after, they probably wish they had the dirtiest, oldest coal plant in their neighborhood, dealing with all the soot, all the mercury, all the elevated mercury levels in people's blood. Then that nuclear facility became the very worst energy nightmare. And that's the problem with the four. Until we get away from those four, we are inevitably in a world of trade-offs. And most people, I understand a lot of people just don't want to deal with trade-offs. Just don't want to deal with it. And, at some level, I don't want to deal with it either. But that's the real world that at least I'm in right now. And when I turn on my light, I've been buying wind energy for over 10 years for my home, 100% wind energy. But I know that the actual electrons coming to my property aren't all from wind power. It's out of the regional grid, and tonight in Pennsylvania, probably about 40% of the power we're going to use, all of us tonight, is coming from coal-fired power plants, many of them old, without pollution controls. and probably about 20% are coming from natural gas, and probably about 35% is coming from nuclear, and probably about 5% is coming from all the renewables, if you include literally every piece of renewables, including the big hydro facilities. So anyway, you've been kind to listen to me, and I'm glad to now have the fun part, conversation.
I got a question here. You mentioned before, the coal, the nukes, the oil, the gas. My father's a power plant, well, he's retired now, but he was a power plant engineer. Licensed to run any control room from any of these, coal, nukes, oil, gas. He worked at Yankee Atomic in Mill, Mass for a number of years. Vermont Yankees currently is shutting down because they can't compete with natural gas, plus they're being required to upgrade their systems because their systems are similar to what the Fukushima. What we're hearing from the gas industry, and they're still continue to run it, is they're calling it a bridge fuel. However, the Department of Energy came out earlier this year and are now calling it a foundation fuel. And this was echoed by the American Natural Gas Association, Hangar. So which is it? Is it still a bridge fuel? Because I'm not seeing the end of the bridge.
Here's that's a great question, and you know, I think that's the realistic direct answer to that is it depends on quote unquote us. For me, it's a bridge fuel, and I've done my whole life has been about that, and trying to get the end point of the bridge built well before now. For others, it's not, to be honest, right? You know, for Hangar, understandably, I don't think they view it necessarily as a bridge fuel. They probably view it as something that will be here for a very, very long time. I think it depends on us. You know, I'd look at California, which is the most aggressive state in the country in deploying renewable energy for making electricity. And they plan to be at 30%, maybe 33% renewables. And they've got a pretty broad definition of renewables, so they include in that trash burning, you know, incinerators. Some people get a little upset about that. But they're going to be at 33% renewables by their definition sometime around 2020 for their electricity. That means 67% are going to be coming from something else, even in 2020. And you know, that's not addressing their transportation fuels. So that's the most aggressive state in the country by far. I think yeah, you're looking at a long trip right now, but I want it to be a bridge fuel. I want it to be a bridge fuel. I want the trip to be short as possible. I want to accelerate renewables and energy efficiency. You know, I also want to minimize the damage along the trip. I want to reduce risks and reduce impacts. And you know, I like the word justice. I like the word justice in your name. I think that's very, very important. The truth is that some people get hurt by our energy use. You know, I live in the 3 Mile Island evacuation area, but I haven't been hurt. People have been hurt by undermining of their homes through coal. People have been hurt by pollution of their water well as a result of gas production. People have been hurt by all of these energy choices. And I think it's a responsibility for all of us who, whether we like it or not, we're using all this stuff. None of us are immune from it. You can point fingers, but none of us are not using it. Unless you're off the grid and living on solar or something, then okay, you get a pass. But unless you're doing that, you're not immune from this. And probably, unless you walked here, you're not immune from this.
May I ask a question, sir?
So, yeah, just let me finish the point. I think it's very important to compensate those who are hurt. Very important. And do everything possible to prevent the next person from being hurt. Yeah.
I was listening very carefully early on because it seems like you have a commitment to a certain notion of social justice, that you have a commitment that you actually really care about what happens to people who get hurt. For example, the story about the fire, and I appreciate that. But it worries me, particularly with respect to the bridge fuel argument, that it seems to be facts on the ground that the gas companies are not in any way interested in natural gas as a bridge fuel, but in fact want to see it, they're going to extend its rate for as long as they possibly can, even though it may well be, I don't know that I think it's a bridge to nowhere, I think it's actually a bridge to climate change. But having said that, given how much it appears to be the case that you do care about people who get hurt, I wonder how you respond to the notion that much of that compensation that you refer to is just not possible. People who are going to get cancer, breast cancer from exposure to benzene that's part of fracking fluids. I don't know that there's any such thing, and I think you'd agree with me about that, as compensation for those people.
But that's true.
The people injured at Dimmock.
Well, I fundamentally agree with the point, but you have to extend it to all the people, the 34,000 people who are dying from breathing soot this year. Okay?
Sure.
And you have to extend it to the soldiers who died fighting a war for us. And you have to extend it, you know, the point is that I think we're all implicated in that, and so my view is you got to try to minimize the risk, minimize it as much as possible. You have to be honest with people, and at least I'm going to be honest with people and say there are people who get hurt by all of these choices, no matter how you do it, no matter how you do this. There are people going to get hurt tonight as a result of these choices, and for me, the way forward is to accelerate renewables and try to not only minimize the risks, but also try to do what you can for people who have been hurt. I don't disagree with you that somebody loses their life. For example, the 34,000 people who breathe soot and lose their life for it. What's the right compensation? I mean, courts actually figure that stuff out. But I accept you're a philosophy professor, so I'm not going to argue with you. But I accept the point that there's an incomplete compensation that is often the best people can do.
Well, my question is actually this, though.
Okay.
The Democratic Party, right, in light of all of the issues that you talked about, has recently voted. I actually had the privilege of being one of the proxy voters for my county, Columbia County, at the last meeting of the Democratic Committee in Lancaster. And the Democratic Party voted 115 to 81 for a 6-year moratorium, a vote on a resolution that didn't even make the floor last year, but did make the floor this year. I, among several others, was able actually to speak to the motion, and it passed 115 to 81. So this I take to be the will of the party, the Democratic Party. It's not a overwhelmingly crushing vote, but it is a decisive vote, 115 to 81, and you, I know, stand opposed to the moratorium resolution. So my question is, how do you plan to address your own Democratic Party voters, of which I'm one, when you stand opposed to the Democratic Party?
Well, look, there are some things that the Democratic Party stands for that I don't agree with, very frankly. I would hope everybody in this room who's a Democrat finds something that you don't agree with the Democratic Party. I'm not first and foremost a party guy. I'm a proud Democrat, but I'm not a blind salute whatever the party tells me to do. And in this instance, I've got 29 years of experience, and I actually have an understanding of what these things are. And you know, if we're going to have a moratorium on gas, we ought to have a moratorium on nuclear, we ought to have a moratorium on coal, and we ought to have a moratorium on oil. And I very much respect people who, like you, who have that view. I also support a moratorium on public lands. And then, you know, we've gone through the other steps that I would take. But you and I are not going to ultimately agree on that one point. That may be a deal breaker, and that's the way it would have to be. That's a matter of conscience for you and a matter of conscience for me. I can't look at somebody and who is breathing soot and tell them somehow or another that gas is worse than the coal. I can't look at somebody who's at a nuclear plant tonight and say gas is worse than the risk you're taking with nuclear. I can't do that. I can look at them and say all of these energy choices have real problems, real problems. And we've got to take all of you seriously, whether you're by a coal plant, whether you're at a nuclear plant, whether you're somehow or another threatened by oil production or oil use, or we all are. That I understand. That I understand. And that I am ready to fight for, and have frankly been fighting for. So we agree, I think, on a whole lot. But I'm not able, in good conscience, based on my experience, to tell you that somehow or another one of these four traditional energy choices is so much worse than the others that it ought to be sort of treated in that fashion. Yeah.
Thanks for your protection for the forest. To me, that's a big deal. I'd like to address the trade-offs that you were referring to earlier, and you said that you're not willing to say that one of the four is significantly worse than the others. Well, the most recent scientific data does clearly show that natural gas extracted through the process of hydraulic fracturing is significantly worse because several things. If you look at it, if we're concerned about climate change, and I assume you're very concerned about climate change, otherwise you wouldn't have been promoting renewables. Within a 20-year period, the difference in the impact of leaking methane into the atmosphere is significantly more dangerous, that it makes it far more a critical issue than coal or oil or whatever. We're talking about 105 times more damaging than CO2. And I'll start with this.
Can I respond to that?
I just wanted to finish
Okay,
the sentence.
go ahead.
Thank you. I do
Yeah.
want to hear you. We've got 9% is the typical, and this is undisputable, 9% of the extracted gas leaks into the atmosphere at some point, from the point of extraction at the drill pad to at the end point, 9%. Now, we're not even going to go into the 2.5 million gallons of water which are left behind and taken out of the water cycle. That's a whole nother issue, which we might address later. But with 9% leaking into the atmosphere, add that to 500,000, up to 500,000 orphaned wells in Pennsylvania, vertical wells, conventional wells, that are leaking at various rates. Some just a little, maybe some none, but many leaking. We've got a huge methane problem that is invisible. The state of Colorado, they put monitors up and showed that the pollution is equivalent to a bad day in Los Angeles. That could be happening here. I'm saying this is far, just from the methane,
Ready?
it's far worse. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate you're recognizing that you have a strong agreement on protecting the state forests and that the parks.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm the guy who's got whatever protection we have during this administration, which is not enough. I mean, obviously you have to have a new governor to really protect our forests. By the way, there's a bill being introduced to drill the forests out and use the money to pay for roads and bridges. It's going to That's a very significant threat. It's a horrendous bill. So look, you use some I think, strong adverbs or adjectives, say unarguably, things like that. I'm aware of the Howard study. I'm aware of the NOAA readings at the Utah gas field, and also one in Colorado. And I think that's part of the scientific evidence, but it's far from all of it. It's the part that ought to be considered and weighed and considered, but it's just not accurate to say that's all of the evidence. There's very considerable differences on estimates of methane leakage rates. Very considerable differences. The range is very, very broad, ranging from less than 2% all the way up to the numbers that you indicated. There are 6 studies that disagree with Professor Howard. 6. I've read each one of them. And we could offline go through the methodological and measurement differences at the heart of those studies. So it's simply not accurate to say there isn't an argument. There's a very significant argument about methane leakage rates. And I think that more important is that there ought to be broad agreement that we've got to, in fact, attack methane leakage rates. Regardless of what the rate is, they can be made lower, and they need to be made lower. And it's one of the reasons I supported the EPA rulemaking on green completions for gas drilling, which goes into effect, I think, is it January 2014? I think it's January 2014. 2015. Okay. That's an important regulatory measure. So there are big arguments for that, but I mean, with all due respect, you were focusing on one issue, which is methane. It's an important one. But when you go to a coal plant, you get all kinds of other emissions. You get arsenic, lead, cadmium, soot, which you don't get from any part of the gas production cycle. That's not to excuse what's going on with gas, but it's just not accurate to say that somehow or another that it's so clear that gas production is worse. Again, 1 out of 6 women in the United States tonight have mercury levels that are toxic. That came not from nukes, that didn't come from oil, that didn't come from gas or renewables, it came from coal. That's a horrendous impact. So
Climate changing, though.
well, I mean, I'm absolutely on board with the point about climate, and the point about the methane leakage is a very serious one, but it's not accurate to say there's no argument. In fact, there's a very big argument going on about that, and that there needs to be much more work done on that, and hopefully we could agree that there needs to be much more work done in reducing the emissions.
Yeah, John Kesich, Tioga County. We've exchanged a few emails.
Nice to see you.
What makes you think that we won't be seeing the kind of smog and ozone that they have in the Barnett Shale? And why won't we be seeing the same sorts of childhood asthma rates?
Right.
Some
Well,
ages
first
have 1 in
I'm
4.
concerned. I am, and I've been sounding that alarm for a very long time. I've been actually saying and criticized for it, and I might be wrong, might be right or wrong on this statement. I believe the air issues are more substantial with gas production than the water issues. That's not to say there aren't water issues. There are. But I actually believe the air emission issues are a bigger challenge. They are. It's one of the reasons why I'm very strongly in favor of requiring the installation of the best pollution control equipment on all of these compressor engines, and I do support much better monitoring of local emissions than we have now. I think those two things are very, very important. I think it's also important to understand that our NOx and SOx levels in the United States have been going down. I'm not talking about localized levels. I'm talking about in regional airsheds. They've been going down. One of the reasons they've been going down is because we've gone in this country from 50% coal-fired generation to, at least for a little period in 2012, even as low as 32%. For the year it was 37%. It's back up now because coal is beating gas in the market. It's displacing gas in the market right now. It's probably around 40%. So the air quality generally across America has gotten better. It's gotten better. Now, that's not, again, I don't want to be misquoted, and I don't want to be misrepresented. That's not me saying I don't care about the local air impacts. I've said I do care about the local air impacts. And we ought to take strong measures to deal with those. And this governor won't, I will.
Excuse me, are they testing for methane now? When you say that, is methane included in the air quality? Because I think a lot of the testing are not testing.
No, I think you're right. I don't think there's enough measuring going on
Which
for methane
could be
leakage.
critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's very important to get to real facts. And I think there is uncertainty about the methane leakage rates. And I think getting more certainty about that is very important. So I would agree with you. I think you and then you. Yeah.
Over the course of 2 or 3 years, all of us in here have been studying the gas-related issues, trying to find a reason why we would want to support fracking, okay? Extreme gas extraction.
Well, can I just interrupt one thing? I don't support fracking. I don't support nuclear. I don't support coal. I don't support oil. I support renewables. But anyway.
What we have seen is what I would call criminal activity within the government. Our elected officials, they're all bought and paid for by the gas and oil companies. I don't know where you're at there, but every one of them is bought and paid for by the gas and oil companies. And the gas and oil companies are writing the rules, and they have rescinded rules that maybe the coal company still has to use, or the power plant still has to use. They have rescinded and diminished some of the laws that should be strongly implemented.
You refer to some of the quote-unquote exemptions from the various federal laws.
It's just hideous.
Yeah.
It's a civil
Look,
rights issue with a lot of us folks here.
Right. Look, you know, the gas industry is absolutely, at this point, got carte blanche in the state. I'm not going to stand here and suggest otherwise to you. I don't know one major thing in the last 2.5 years that they've lost.